Hello, everyone. My name is Cydney Franklin. I've worked in the community development arena for the last 8 or 9 years in a number of different roles and for a few different agencies, public governmental entities, in the offices of public officials. And then for the last 5 or 6 years, I've worked with 2 community-focused nonprofit agencies. And one of the more surprising things that I've learned from my time working in the nonprofit arena, and then now in my current role, working in one revitalizing neighborhood in North Omaha, so currently the things that I'm learning, is this idea that our perception of community and neighborhood and our attitude towards it matters. So standing here talking to you today about this idea, it seems pretty obvious to me, and it almost seems basic, this idea that the way we think about, talk about, and interact within communities, that matters. But I don't think it's super obvious to a lot of us, and honestly, until I started preparing for today, I didn't realize that I don't really talk about it, very often. What I want to convey today is this idea that it does matter. And so I wanted to do a little pretend exercise where, let's say that this group were to collectively identify one recognizable Omaha neighborhood. So just a neighborhood that all of you would know by name if we had to name it. And let's just say I asked each of you to kind of jot down some descriptors about that neighborhood. So the things that come to mind when you think of the features, the characteristics, kind of the focal points of that neighborhood, I think all of us could easily do that. We could easily jot down about this neighborhood that we know and recognize. I could make the assumption that there'd be a lot of diversity on our lists. Some of us would have some kind of positive highlights of the neighborhood, things that are kind of spotlighting, and others maybe not so positive. All of the things that we probably jot down on our list would be based on our experiences and our attitude and our perception of that neighborhood. And so another assumption that I think I would be comfortable making is that your perception and your attitude towards that place affects how you think about, talk about, and interact within that place. And so that's kind of the idea that I want to convey to you, is that perception matters. And in the community development arena, it matters particularly. Attitude affects neighborhoods. It affects a neighborhood's ability to change and transition past the things that are challenging and struggling, and that are struggles. You know, too often when we're talking about neighborhoods and communities that experience disinvestment, the kind of commonplace tendency is to highlight and focus on what's ailing and what's deficient. I mean, it's almost second place nature to do so. I'm guilty of that as well, to describe a place based on its worst feature. And I'm also not a naive person. I know that in any type of community development strategy or approach to revitalization, that calling out, naming, and pinpointing the issues that are ailing a community, the gaps, the points where pivot is needed, that's critical, that's central, that's rarely avoided, that's kind of the foundation of any revitalization approach. But what I want to talk about is this idea that alone can't be the only approach. This idea that a change in mindset and attitude in community development, it matters. So how do we transition from focusing on the deficiency and the ailment and the disinvestment and begin to think about the strengths and maybe the hidden wealth and the hidden talent and the resiliency of these places, and allowing them to become more a part of the conversation, and thus becoming part of the resources and almost the toolkit to combat those deficiencies and those gaps. Many of you are probably familiar with the common term that I'm referring to, and that's called asset mapping or asset building. And so what that means, that's just kind of outlaying the assets that are available within a community. It involves really pinpointing and then deploying the different forms of community capital that exist in a neighborhood and in a community. And when robust and sufficient, those forms of capital are what sustains and grows a place. When we're talking about neighborhoods that struggle with disinvestment and have other challenges, often, and this isn't 100% of the time, but often the forms of capital, community capital, that are most long-lasting and pervasive are social and human forms of capital. And so by social and human forms of capital, I'm talking about the mentors and the teachers, the community figures and the family dynamics, the history and the culture, these tangibles and these intangibles that really form the foundation of any type of neighborhood vibrancy that are really critical. Unfortunately, oftentimes in this work, it's those sources of pride and vibrancy that are often devalued or overlooked. And I want to just reiterate this idea that that would be a mistake. These are the things that make a neighborhood special, and they should be spotlighted. So where environmental, physical, or even financial capital may be insufficient or lacking, it's these sources of neighborhood pride, these sources of human and social capital that are really integral to realizing neighborhood vibrancy. And so I just want to leave you with this, is this idea and this truth that neighborhood level work is super complicated. You're dealing with people, you're dealing with diverse neighborhoods, historical dynamics, and a changing landscape. And all of that does is add to the complexity of the process. But this idea that I think is often missed is this idea that one, changing a perception and attitude matters, but doing that stems from, highlighting and spotlighting the sources of pride in the people and the culture that exists in these communities. And the other thing that can do is it'll empower the people that live and work within these communities to themselves be the producers of the resources that their neighborhoods need. And so I think that that's an incredible thing that I need to talk about more, and that I just want to convey with all of you. I know some of you personally work in the community field and others don't, but that's a really critical piece to the work. And I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to my kind of home base. This is a kind of really interesting southeast view of a neighborhood revitalization project currently unfolding in North Omaha's Highlander neighborhood. It's a project that I'm intimately affiliated with, and that I'm super proud to work on. And this is an area of town where we deploy this idea. And if anyone wants to learn more about it, you can check us out at 75north.org. Thanks.